Hi, welcome to the Art of Shame-Free Living podcast. If you haven't already checked out my program, Manifest Me, you can check that out at coachcrystal.ca/manifest-me. It's all like the things I talk about here on the podcast, but more intensive and more deeply integrated. I also am running a women's retreat in the Rocky Mountains, April 22nd to 25th, and you can come join us there. All the links should be in the show notes. Okay, so today I want to get into anxiety and depression, specifically in teens, maybe a little bit tweens, but teens and young adults more specifically. This came to be, I have a bunch of books on my lap because I want to share some quotes, but this came to be because I'm in a Facebook group and one of the moms there was like, why do we think anxiety and depression is like on the rise? Why is it such a struggle for our kids? And she was kind of talking about like 18 to 25-year-olds-ish. She was like, what do we think the reason behind it is? And there was a lot of different ideas. You know, somebody said that maybe we need to do more to teach kids hard work and perseverance at home. And someone else said, maybe we need to get more sunshine and spend time in nature. And maybe we need to spend more time focusing on healthy foods and less screens. Screens got brought up a lot in the comments. And as I was scrolling through them, I really felt like we were missing the mark. Not that those things don't interact and have an impact. And for sure, screens can exacerbate the problem. But why do we go to our phone? Why do we go to screens? Why do we go to overeating or over drinking or pornography use or any of the compulsive habits that we have that long-term typically have a deficit on us in our life and our relationships? There's something that's a root cause below that. And I think oftentimes it doesn't get talked about or conversed about in these kinds of conversations. And so this is my response to that random comment in a Facebook group. I really think that shame obviously has something to do with anxiety and depression, obviously being that's the whole topic of my podcast. But I want to talk about how shame interacts with anxiety and depression and why I feel like it's interconnected. And I'm not saying that the other things don't matter, but I think that this is the crux of it. And if we are going to the things that are on the surface at the top and we're not getting to the root cause, what's really underneath it, we're going to continuously just be patching up these huge wounds with like tiny little Band-Aids. We're just never going to get into it. So I'm going to talk about 3 steps that I learned in Buddhism recently. I'm reading a lot of Thich Nhat Hanh books right now that I think are going to help today. And I'm also going to talk about what I think about anxiety and depression. I'm first going to share a quote from Brené Brown. She's where I first learned about shame from years and years ago. I read several of her books. One of the first books that I read from her was The Gifts of Imperfection. And this is her definition of shame, which I think is a really good one. I'm going to read here. It's the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. So I've heard a lot of people say, shame is just not a problem that I deal with. Like, yeah, I'm glad that you're, helping people through that, but that's not my problem. I want to offer that if you're a human, you have shame. If you're a human, you deal with shame. You just might not understand it yet. You might not see it everywhere yet. I just got a message from one of you listeners. Thanks for listening. And she said, I didn't really think shame was my problem. And then I started listening and I started thinking about more and it really started hitting my heart. And I was like, oh, wait, it's everywhere. And now I can't unsee it. That's actually one of the more common messages that I get from people is that when they learn more about shame, they're like, oh my goodness, it's ruling everything. It's interacting with everything. That's what I felt. That's why I wanted to share this podcast, was to really start shining a light on like, it really is something that every single one of us deal with in some way or another. And maybe we're not clear on how that impacts our life right now. But I want you to think about that quote, the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we're flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Does that not just feel like depression when you think of that feeling of it? It feels so interconnected to me. It feels like there might be some other thoughts on the surface, but when you get to the root of really underneath what I'm feeling, it's so often like something's wrong with me. I'm broken. Why do I feel the way that I do? I shouldn't be feeling this way. Other people don't feel this way. I should be happier. I should appreciate this more. I should be enjoying my life more. Maybe there's something wrong with me. And then it just swirls down and down and down and down and more into depression. There's this emotional scale. I don't remember who created it, but there's different colors and numbers and stuff at the top and at the bottom. And I think at the top is like compassion or love or something. And at the very bottom is shame. And it's like the frequency of emotions. And shame is like the lowest frequency emotion. And so I find that despair, those despairing thoughts kind of swirl down. And eventually we find shame at the bottom there. So I think that depression is kind of easy to see, like how there'd be a correlation between shame and depression, shame being some level of inadequacy or not enoughness or something's broken within me, leading to more depression and maybe even the root of the depression in the first place. The other thing I want to mention is anxiety. So me and ChatGPT had a conversation about this because I couldn't exactly remember the 3 different types of anxiety that our psychiatrist had mentioned when we were there the other day. But These are the three. Social, which is like social anxiety being like a fear of judgment. What are people going to think about me? Health, something will go wrong, like a medical catastrophe, and I won't be able to handle it. It'll be like too much for me. And general anxiety being like just a persistent worry, a constant mental tension that like things are going to go wrong, whatever they are. They don't have to be health or social specifically. And I want you to think about shame-based thoughts, because often we're just like, oh, it's just anxiety. They're like, how is shame anxiety? But if you think about social anxiety, it's like, what are people going to think of me? Am I going to say something wrong? Am I going to do something wrong? Am I going to embarrass myself? Am I going to connect with other people? Are they not going to like me? What are the thoughts I think they might be thinking about me? All of that entire thing I just said is shame. How I perceive myself to be inadequate or not enough somehow under the surface. It's those underlying worries, right? On the surface, it just feels like anxiety. Like, nope, I don't want to go that. No, I don't want to, that does not sound like fun to me. But under the surface, it's like, why? What am I really afraid of? What is that fear really saying to me about me? I think the same goes with health and general anxiety as well, but more in the capacity. Like, what if I can't handle it? What if it's too much for me? What if it's so much that it just knocks me over and I can't ever get back up again? What if something goes wrong and I don't know how to respond? Again, I think at some level feeling like there's a brokenness or a not enoughness or an inadequacy at the root. So now that I see this interconnection between anxiety and depression, it feels so connected to me. It feels, well, then how can we actually help our teens and young adults? Like if anxiety and depression are on the rise, which is kind of what this comment was saying, and I haven't statistically corroborated that, but I've heard people say that that's true before. And I read Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and I think he talks about research alluding to that as well. So if anxiety and depression really are on the rise, how is shame interconnected in that? How is it impacting people? And what can we do instead? How can we help kind of protect and amplify our children to these symptoms that we seem to be seeing be on the rise? And I would say that shame is like an identity. It's how I'm perceiving myself. It's the thoughts that I have about myself under the surface. They're very they feel very concrete. They don't feel very malleable, and they feel very true and kind of sticky. So how do we help somebody change their identity? If that's how they perceive themselves, how do we change that? I think on the macro level, there's this idea within religion and also community and also school that kind of lends itself to shame, that we've often used shame as a way to mitigate behavior. We want somebody to do something. We don't want them to do something else. And so we often use shame-based modalities in parenting, in teaching religion, in teaching people even in school. And we're not necessarily doing it consciously, but we often are doing it. I want you to think about shame as a hierarchy. So shame as a hierarchy of I'm better than you, or you're better than me. Something's wrong with me and not with you, or whatever. We usually do this up-down thing, this hierarchy within shame. So think about school, the up-down hierarchy in school, right? I get my grade. I do better than you. You do better than me. I feel worse about myself. You feel better about yourself. Back and forth, back and forth. And I don't think that we mean for that to happen, but I think that does happen. I think even in parenting, right? If you look at the parenting sphere, it's like if my child chooses what I want them to choose, if they follow my value system, if they behave well when they're out in public and when they're at home, then I can feel good about myself and about my parenting. And it feels very interconnected. And I know consciously you might not agree with any of this, but I want you to notice those little feelings under the surface that are like, oh, that actually resonates. I really do feel that way sometimes about my parenting. Or maybe I really did feel that way sometimes about my education. We do it with beauty. We do it with fame. We do it with Instagram followers or, people that we think are way cooler than we are, popularity. There's so many things that we do this with, but I think the important piece here being that shame levels us on these hierarchies that are invisible. But throughout our life, I think unconsciously we've been creating these identities. And so I think it can be hard to untangle. So let's get into the solution side of it. I loved Brené Brown's research and I loved her books and I wanted more and I wanted more. And I ended up taking a course through her called Dare to Lead, and it was fantastic. And it really just dived me all the way into shame. But I was really more concerned with how do we heal this? How do we fix this? Okay, I see it everywhere, but now what do we do? And so that led me down some other paths of kind of knowledge and wisdom and trying to figure out what I could find over here. And it was interesting because a lot of this came from my own kind of learning. My expertise, as you will, really came from that I feel shame, that I feel very triggered often, that I feel a lot of big emotions. And as I kind of untangled those and sat with them and felt through them, I noticed that what really changed was as I sat with my feelings, the feelings that are present here, that my identity started to shift. My mindset started to shift. The way that I believed about myself, the perception, my reality changed as I sat more with my feelings and spent more time with my feelings. And now let's get to Buddhism. Because what I think is fascinating is that I didn't learn this first from Buddhism, but as I started learning more about Buddhism, I was like, yes, this is exactly how it's been for me and for my clients. So if we want to help our children on the macro level, I hope we change the system. I hope we change the culture in which we teach. I hope we parent less with shame. I hope we church and religion less with shame. I hope that we teach in school less with shame. But I think it starts with us first. I think humans interact with all of those different areas, those different infrastructures. And so we need to be the ones to change first if we want to see that change in the world. And so I think it starts within us and what we can do, and then we can also help our children through it. And so I think the answer is the same for us and for them. How do we deal with our shame? And then how do we help them through theirs? And I think that it has so much more to do with what's happening in our whole system, in our whole feeling space, than it does our conscious space. It's easy to be like, just change your thoughts, or just do some mantras, or, tell yourself something different about yourself. Just, change those things that feel so sticky. But it's not as easy as that. We might change it for a little bit. We might even think that it's changed and then be like, wait, I don't actually think this really has changed. I think it happens more at a subconscious, unconscious level. I mentioned this before, but I went to a meditation retreat and there was a quote there that was shared that 90 to 95%, or maybe even more, of what happens in our nervous system happens on a subconscious or an unconscious level. So if we want to change things, we have to do more than just speak about it consciously. We really have to get to the root. We really have to shift what's happening below the surface in order for what's happening above the surface to change. Changing the root, changing what seed we're planting, that's what changes the rest of the plant. So off to Buddhism. So if you're watching this video, you can see these. I'll also mention them in case you're listening. But Thich Nhat Hanh is who I've been reading lately, and this is one of his books. It's called You Are Here. I just finished this one. I love it. It's dog marked everywhere. And what is that called? Earmarked everywhere. I have so many little things that I've written down that I love. And the one that I'm reading for him now is this book. It's called No Mud, No Lotus. And it's all about the art of transforming suffering and suffering well. So in here, he starts talking about what we do, what we can do for our suffering and for our pain. And pushing it down is not the way to do it. He said, we often push it down when we cut ourselves off from the pain in our mind, but we're abandoning our bodies where suffering is being stored. So he talks about how often we, cover up what's happening with inside of us. We try to, go to screens, or maybe we go to overeating. Maybe we go to the fridge. Maybe we do something else to try and kind of hide this discomfort and this suffering within. And he's like, it'll just keep popping up if we do that. So I want to share some of the steps. I've kind of broken it down into these 3 steps based on what he shares in this book. But he says the first step in the art of transforming suffering is to come home to our suffering and recognize it. So I would say step 1 is to just pause and be still and remain with the emotion, the discomfort that's happening within us. So recognizing suffering and coming home to it, to me, feels like creating the time and space for us to actually feel what we're truly feeling. And I think it has less to do with naming our emotions. I used to really think that we needed to name it, and that was part of this process. I actually don't think that that's as important. I think that it's the process of feeling the feeling and actually being with the feeling. So number 1 would be, let's sit with the feeling that's there. Number 2, going along with number 1, he says, following our breathing and acknowledging it. Don't try to deny uncomfortable emotions or push them down. So he's talking about how sometimes the feeling can be really intense, but as you're feeling that feeling, you can also just notice your breath. And as you notice your breath, as you're noticing the feeling, it can already help to ease the suffering a little bit. He said, often we ignore the child that's within. Suffering is a hurt child crying out to us, but we ignore the voice of the child within. And so step 1 is all about, instead of ignoring the child within that's already there, shouting pretty loudly at us probably, it's sitting and feeling with it and breathing with it. Number 2 is cradling the suffering. So the practice is to, instead of fight or suppress it, cradle it with a lot of tenderness. Just the act of taking a child into your arms with tenderness can already bring relief. If we can recognize and cradle the suffering while we breathe mindfully, there is relief already. So number 2 is just cradling it with compassion, with love, just like we would a little child that was hurt or suffering. Number 3 is looking deeply with kindness and looking for the message. So non-judgmentally recognizing and embracing this great suffering is not at all the same thing as giving in to it. Once you have offered your acknowledgement and care to the suffering, it naturally will become less impenetrable and more workable. And then you have the chance to look deeply at it with kindness, still breathing and mindfully, and find out why it has come to you. It is trying to get your attention, to tell you something, and now you take the opportunity to listen. So number 1, being with a feeling. Number 2, cradling the feeling, cradling the suffering. And number 3, looking deeply with kindness and seeing what message is present there. And I would say that these are ways of feeling feelings that I have really understood in my own life, in my children's life, in my family's life, and then in my clients' lives. And I've practiced this over and over and over again. And so then to read it in Buddhism and be like, this is actually what you're doing. It's the same. It's the same steps that I've been teaching for a long time that have brought me relief from my own suffering. And I would say that when it comes to anxiety and depression, if we're not getting to the root of my perceptions about myself, my self-identity, the feeling state in the body, it's never going to change permanently. It will always stay like a surface level change. So if you want some more deep and lasting change, I invite you to spend time with your suffering, to spend time with the pain, spend time with the discomfort. You can do it with a therapist, with a counselor, with a coach, with a friend, with a loved one, but just allow yourself to just be there and be present with the feeling. Cradle it like you would cradle a little child, and then listen to its message. And for me, that has been the most impactful and most helpful. And over time, even though it doesn't seem related, my identity changed. How I perceived myself changed. The thoughts that felt much more shame-based before really shifted and felt so much more malleable and so much less true. And when they do pop up and feel true, I know how to address it. And I have a path forward. I have steps to address it. So that's what I want to say about anxiety and depression and shame. And also just thank you for Thich Nhat Hanh and for his words and for how beautifully he's able to use his words to help us and help us ease our suffering. His book is called No Mud, No Lotus because it's the art of suffering. Suffering comes with joy. You don't have one without the other. The mud is the suffering, the lotus is the joy, and they come together. And I would say through my practice and experience of these words, that as I sit with those feelings, they do transform to what feels like that lotus, what feels like that joy and that happiness on the inside. So I hope you find some of that too and feel some of that too. And do some work to take time and space to really integrate what I'm teaching here and not just listen and be like, oh, that's an interesting concept, or like, oh yeah, I agree or disagree or whatever, but really try to practice it, experiment with it and see what happens for you. So thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week.